Hi, this is Mr. Young with Anatomy and Physiology at Glacier High School. Welcome to my video podcast on histology, the study of tissues. Today we'll spend time looking at connective tissue, and we're going to look at a lot of pictures. As we do so, we'll try to identify the parts that we see and try to figure out from there what the functions of those tissues are. We'll lastly try to connect all of that with exactly where we can find it in the body. Focusing on connective tissue today, we're going to be looking at pictures that show a wide variety of structures, and from that we can infer a wide variety of functions. At its essence, however, we can find that connective tissue has a role in connecting epithelial tissue to the rest of the body. Epithelial tissue lines and covers things, like, for example, this arm showing the lining of the skin, this cutaneous membrane. To begin with, we can find the need to connect the skin to the deeper tissues like muscle. How do we do it? Well, one example, loose connective or areolar tissue can do just that. Another type of connective tissue might be that which allows muscles to attach to bones. Muscle here of the triceps, now to a bone, we need a tendon. We need to connect. A third is found enveloping some organs, be it your heart or kidney. Can be found in areas where we need protection from shock and we need protection from heat fluctuation, insulation. Adipose tissue can serve that role, and it's also found in the hypodermis, connecting skin to the deeper layers. Finally, we see some supporting connective tissue found here as cartilage, shown at the distal end of your humerus, articular cartilage, and lastly the bone itself, another supporting connective tissue. A final type of connective tissue can be found in the fluids of blood and lymph, necessary to help transport things throughout the body. Wide variety of tissue structures, wide variety of functions. Having been fresh off of our study with epithelial tissue, let's take just a quick moment to review epithelial tissue in light of our new type of tissue, connective tissue. Epithelium is a lining and covering parts of the body. Here is a duct that has lining it several different layers of cuboidal cells. We refer to this as stratified cuboidal epithelial. Contrasting that with connective tissue, we see cells are quite spaced relative to one another. Epithelial tissue, they were attached to one another. That's one difference. How about another difference? Whereas we were lining and covering things, now we're looking at a deeper tissue, a tissue that is connecting the lining to something else. In this picture, we see connective tissue shown right here, deep to the epithelial tissue. There are really three defining features that all connective tissues will share. The first that you may see is the presence of extracellular protein fibers. In the first case, we see a reticular fiber. In the case of our bone and our tendons, we see a high degree of collagen fibers, as well as in the case of cartilage, hyaline cartilage down below. And then in our adipose tissue and our areolar tissue, we have elastic fibers, among other fibers. But those are a diagnostic feature of many connective tissues, the presence of extracellular protein fibers. A second defining feature of connective tissues is the presence of an extracellular ground substance. The ground substance is a highly viscous fluid, and this fluid is surrounding cells, surrounding those proteins that are also embedded in the extracellular domain. And that fluid contains proteoglycans and glycoproteins. The fluid itself can actually serve to help our body to trap microorganisms. You can think about bacteria and other bugs that are getting held up in goop and mud. They get stuck, and that allows our own body's macrophages and immune system to respond and attack. So the extracellular matrix, comprised by our proteins and our ground substance, is a defining feature of all connective tissue. And a final defining feature is the presence of highly specialized cells in connective tissue. In the first diagram, you're seeing reticular tissue that's making up the stroma of your spleen, your liver, and other organs. And it has reticulocytes that are found within. In the case of bone, we have osteocytes that are helping to make the bone. We have fibroblasts in our tendons and chondrocytes of our cartilage and adipocytes of our fats. and fibroblasts and macrophages and all sorts of other specialized cells in areolar tissue. Connective tissue is comprised of highly specialized cells, the types of which and the abundance of which will depend upon the location and the type of tissue. So this slide we'll use to really identify where we can see the key functions of connective tissue. This is a loose areolar connective tissue slide, and the diagram shows first a structural framework present by all of the varieties of protein fibers present. There are 3 protein fibers in connective tissues, the first of which is shown by this large collagen fiber. These collagen fibers are in abundance in bone and in cartilage and in dense connective tissues. When parallel, we find that they confer a high degree of tensile strength. They're the strongest of our connective tissues. We also have some other fibers shown here at the top of our diagram, where you see reticular cartilage assuming a woven or web-like shape. And the fact that these are not all parallel suggests that these can be tough yet flexible and able to withstand forces applied in multiple different directions. Lastly, we see the thin elastic fibers shown in our diagram as these that span the entire diagram. And these elastic fibers likewise may not always be unidirectional, but may be in a woven pattern, allowing for the tissue to maintain its shape, be it moving your nose back and forth and allowing it to come back, or your ears, for example. And so a high degree or a high amount of elastic cartilage will allow for great flexibility and the ability to maintain shape. Together, those protein fibers help to provide structural framework for connective tissues. Transportation of fluids is another key feature of connective tissue. There's a wide variation in blood supply across the connective tissue spectrum. Some are well vascularized, as you see in this diagram, having blood vessels with blood within. Remember, the blood itself is a connective tissue. The endothelial lining of our blood vessel and epithelial tissue, however. But this blood, of course, will serve to transport products, be it waste gases, CO2. Other tissues, other connective tissues lack blood supply, however, and are entirely avascular. In those cases, transportation of fluids is not so much through the blood, which is absent, but rather through the ground substance itself, the fluid-like environment surrounding these cells in the extracellular matrix. Protection of organs is obvious with the fact that many are surrounded by things like fat, which will help to protect against shock as well as heat fluctuation. Connective tissue interconnects. That's an obvious one. It interconnects to a large degree epithelial tissue to deeper tissues. And then finally, we are storing energy primarily through adipocytes. And lastly, we see defense as a major role in connective tissues. This diagram shows a bunch of cells that are involved in that. For example, you are seeing macrophages, be them fixed or free. The free macrophages are able to migrate to a site where there may be inflammation or where there may be a wound. The fixed macrophages, notice they are typically involved with reticular fibers, which help to give them a specific domain in which to reside. They are somewhat permanent in that tissue and will respond at the localized level to tissue damage. Other cases or other cells that are present for the immune response include antibody-producing cells, as well as macrophages and white blood cells. White blood cells that will roll down the bloodstream and then have the ability to actually slide through the epithelial tissue and invade other connective tissues where inflammation is present. Lastly, you see the presence of the star-shaped mesenchymal cell. This is a type of stem cell. We said that all connective tissues are derived from precursor mesenchymal cells. Some of those retain their plasticity, their ability to differentiate into other cell types, and are present even in the adult in connective tissues. And so should we sustain a wound in this site, this mesenchymal cell has the ability to differentiate to form any of the other cell types needed. Fibroblasts, for example, or others. One other feature to note, that's this guy right here. This is a spider-shaped melanocyte, a melanin-producing cell. It's dark because of the melanin that is within. And so those are in abundance in skin. They help produce the colors that are visible in your skin color. So let's look at a few specific tissue types. The first is showing you some concentric rings, and as you look at these rings, they kind of look like a bunch of twigs that have been cut off, where you see the annual rings of trees, right? Well, this is characteristic of compact bone. And as you look at bone, you'll find that you have bone cells in these dark little pits. Those dark little pits have the term lacuna. Lacuna is a little bed for a bone cell, and the bone cells we refer to as osteocytes. If you remember your roots, osteobone, cyte is for cell. So osteocytes sit in their little beds that we refer to as lacunae, plural. And these osteocytes are separated from one another, but they are connected through little tiny canals, canaliculi, allowing for blood to get to them. This is a vascular tissue. And this vascular tissue has blood coming in these central canals longitudinally up the length of the bone. And this blood is coming from eventually a medullary cavity where you have bone marrow within. So if you're to look at where this diagram comes from, this bone, if I were to continue this all the way around, this would be the outside of my bone shown here. And right in the middle, you'd have this medullary cavity for bone marrow. And on the outside of this portion is where you're going to see these diagrams, these compact bones. So vascular tissue, yes. Osteocytes that are sitting in their little beds, referred to as lacunae. And again, they are durable and very strong because of the high density of collagen fibers, as well as the calcification of minerals, the mineralization that occurs. Calcium and phosphorus being the two primary minerals. Another collagenous tissue is shown here. There is a large purple matrix. Again, this extracellular matrix containing a ground substance and protein fibers. Protein fibers here are primarily collagen. When we talk about collagen, we're going to be referring to a more dense and durable, strong type of connective tissue. In the little pockets shown in the clear color, you have cells that we refer to as chondrocytes. Chondro referring to cartilage. These are cartilaginous cells, giving this a cartilaginous tissue, hyaline cartilage. And this is the tissue that comprises the entire fetal skeleton. It's a flexible tissue, allowing for, as you look in our diagram, inspiration and expiration of the bony thorax. This is, again, collagen-rich, rubbery matrix because of that collagen, but it's abundant throughout the body. Again, we're seeing connective tissue with cells that are spread apart from one another by an extracellular matrix, in this case that is rich with another kind of fiber. These are elastic fibers, and they are not parallel, they are in all directions, allowing for things like your nose to be pulled up and down, left and right, or your ear to be twisted and contorted, and yet returning to its original shape. We are looking at elastic fibers found in the elastic cartilage. We still have chondrocytes, that's what we refer to these cells as, and they are still sitting in their little beds referred to as lacunae, chondrocytes and lacunae. So we've got our elastic cartilage, we've got our hyaline cartilage, and we have one more type of cartilage, and that's shown here. We still see chondrocytes and lacunae, and yet now we see more parallel structures of collagen shown in blue. This collagenous cartilage is a type of fibrocartilage. And it is a compressible cartilage found in your intervertebral discs. But these collagen fibers allow for there to be some strength to these discs. Continuing on, we see another collagen-rich tissue with fibroblasts, shown here in purple, separated from one another by collagen that is quite parallel to one another. The more parallel the collagen fibers, the greater strength that is conferred in one direction. And that direction is, of course, along this axis here. This is the case for tendons and for dense connective tissue in general. Remember that tendons have that job of connecting muscle to bone. Here we're seeing tendons of the humerus and of the shoulder girdle, as well as ligaments that surround these. Again, notice the highly parallel collagen fibers, and then our nuclei of our fibroblasts that are present with it. From the more parallel nature, we get to fibers that are strewn about. We see collagen fibers still present in the pink, collagen. We see elastic fibers very thin now, and these are going in different directions. This is the case of areolar tissue. Areolar tissue helps to provide the basal lamina of your skin, for example. And in this area, you have a cobwebby kind of a tissue. If you were to ever skin a deer, or you were to skin an animal, and you peel it back, you find all of that fascia that's beneath. That subcutaneous fascia has both adipose connective tissue as well as areolar connective tissue within. So it's very soft, very pliable, and this is where you have edema that will develop. All of the extracellular domain here can have fluids that will come in whenever you have swelling at a site of inflammation. It's the extracellular area which is filling up with this fluid that is leached out, for example, from blood vessels, as blood vessel permeability increases in the case of inflammation. Histological preparations of this tissue type oftentimes result in you seeing very little within these cells. These are adipocytes, and they show a large fat globule found within the vacuoles of these tissues. This fat globule is a source of energy for cells, and in addition provides some great cushioning to protect from shock different organs, be it your heart, or your heart, or your kidneys, for example. And so highly specialized cells are referred to as adipocytes. In most cases, in adults, we're finding that fat takes on this white or yellow fat form. You maybe have seen videos of liposuction, or you've seen fat on animals. Those fats are in infants, however, and in children, more of a brown fat. They are a highly vascular fat. And that's why, for example, little children, as part of their thermoregulatory response, in addition to shivering, will actually begin to metabolize those brown fats to release heat, and in doing so, start to heat up the blood and return that back to the vitals. So little kids have the excess brown fat there for that purpose, thermoregulation. So we're thermoregulating here as we insulate. We're also protecting from shock, especially. In this diagram, we're seeing now some reticulocytes. Those are our purple cells here. And these reticulocytes are surrounded by an extracellular domain which has reticular fibers, these web-like fibers. This helps to together make up the stroma of organs like your spleen, your bone marrow, and your lymph nodes, your liver as well. This is the three-dimensional structure that you have in those areas. We end the day by looking at a type of tissue which shows cells that are somewhat circular in nature. If you're to look at a cross-section of it, though, it almost look like an hourglass. They're a biconcave disc, we refer to them as. And this biconcave disc increases the surface area needed for exchange of gases. These are red blood cells. And these red blood cells form a type of connective tissue that is necessary for transporting substances in the body. But in addition to the actual blood cell itself, the erythrocyte, we have fibers that are visible during clotting, and we also have platelets and plasma that are surrounding it, this watery liquid that's on the outside.